Hi everyone, Tom Loria here. Welcome back to the shop. I thought I would interrupt the series I had planned on rigging line to introduce a new series because you guys have been writing in a lot with a lot of questions, and that's great. I love that. So I thought I'd take some time to answer them. I usually answer everyone's questions in the replies, but not everybody reads those replies, so I thought that this would be a good way to get that information out to a broader audience. So I'm going to take a lot of your questions, answer specific questions, show some refinements of some techniques that I've already demonstrated, like weathering or painting sails and that kind of thing. So those will be in this series of videos. I had originally planned to make one video and answer about a half dozen questions that I've gotten over the course of the last few months. But I've gotten too wordy and too long-winded to do this all in one video, so I'm going to break it up into a series of videos. 2, 3, maybe even 4 videos dealing with specific questions and trying to answer them as completely as possible without being too long-winded about it. So each of the videos will be no more than half an hour. I realize that that's still quite a commitment of time, but I have a cunning plan. The cunning plan is this. In the description of this video, I will put time indexes at specific points where I answer specific questions. So if you're really interested in the question about how to color sails correctly, there'll be a time index that will take you right to that spot. You don't have to wade through the whole video clicking and fast forwarding and all that stuff. So that's one thing that will be in the description. The other thing is I get a lot of questions about where do you find this, what do you use for that. So I'm going to list sources. So there'll be sources with active links to those places that actually have websites. Some of them are still a little old-fashioned and do things through snail mail or telephone. But I will put contact information for suppliers and manufacturers of some of the things that I use, that you see me using in the video that you've asked about. So this description, I would strongly urge you to take a look in there and find specifically what you're looking for, because it'll streamline your watching process. Of course, I'm really hoping that you'll watch everything from start to finish, but if you don't, and if you don't have the time, hopefully this will be a streamlined method for getting to the information that you want as quickly as possible. So, let's get started. Our first question is from Marissa Aguilera, and she asks, can you do a video on how you achieve that great authentic color for your sails? I think I can do that. Watch this. Marissa, if you watched the 3-part video of how to make silkspan sails for ship models, then you saw the basic process of how I use silkspan, how I treat it, and how it gets painted and then turned into a sail step by step. But today I'll go, and in that video I only used I used acrylic paints. First of all, I only use acrylic paints on this stuff. I only used titanium white just to speed up the process. The thing that you need to keep in mind is when you're mixing colors is that the colors need to be subtle. So white is good, but if canvas, if it's a canvas sail you're trying to reproduce, then that comes with a little bit of an ecru color, kind of an off-white, an antique white. So the way you get that is by mixing titanium white with maybe a little bit of raw sienna. And it really does just take a little bit. So if you see, like I have this little square here that's probably, let's see, it's 315. It's 12 by, maybe 9 by 12. Let's call it 9 by 12. And that's not much area, but I want to mix up enough paint to do it one time completely. because I might get the perfect color the first time around, and if I don't have enough, how are you going to match it? Because this is all done by eye. So here I'm going to lay out a nice bead of white paint, and you'll see, now this is the raw sienna, probably no more than not even a dime worth, you know, a blob the size of a dime, that's smaller than a dime. So that will probably be enough to mix up the color we need. Just going to take an old palette knife, and I'll move this over here in the middle for now, and you just start mixing. Now these paints, these are just artist acrylics, they're Liquitex. You can get them at AC Moore, you can get them at Michael's, you can get them wherever, wherever they sell artist materials. The other thing that you need to keep in mind whenever you're mixing paints for any purpose, not just for this, but any purpose at all, paints will always dry darker than they appear when they're wet. I'm sure that there's a proper name for that phenomenon, but I don't know what it is. Not really important, just keep it in mind because it never varies. This is dark now, it'll be darker once it's dry. Not by much, but a noticeable amount. A small amount, but noticeable. So that's still too dark, but I'm going to leave it that way because I don't want to waste any more paint on a demonstration, and it'll probably show up better on the camera because the subtle differences really don't show up. So there I've got my paint mixed. I don't need that anymore, and to do it we're going to use that. This is a sponge rubber roller. You can get these at the hardware store. Any paint shop will have it. Any home paint shop, you know, Benjamin Morse, Sherwin-Williams, that kind of thing. Goes on a little roller handle like that. And the idea here is to just lay it on. You don't have to be too scientific about it. You want just a cover. Now I've got some wrinkles up here, as you can see. So you just lift up the corner and get the wrinkles out. If you have small wrinkles, it's okay. You can get those out a little bit later on if you, as you may have seen in the first video, if you use the travel iron to even things out. But right now, that looks pretty good. So there you've seen, that's one color. And what we're going to do is, I know I was going to shoot a video like this, or I was going to demo this. You think I would have gotten everything ready ahead of time, but no. So now, I just want to get close down here, and here. And these big heavy clamps will serve as the counterweights that will allow us to hang over the edge of the table to dry. So now you just take it carefully. Whoops. As I'm saying, you pick it up carefully, and you hang it over the edge of the table. So that's one color. If you wanted to do other colors, suppose you were, you were mixing, you wanted to show some sails that had some age on them, some mileage on them. Perhaps they might be a little grayer. So you could take, basically, actually, yeah, I'll do that. All right, so there you go. There's a little bit of black. And I'm going to mix that in with a heap of white. You remember heap of white. He pitched for the Detroit Tigers in the 50s. So that's going to mix in, and I'm going to mix that right in with the color that's already on the palette. Because really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to say, hey, that's not a real color. Of course, they wouldn't know. So they can't say that. It's the color that you choose to paint your sails. And again, these colors will look, they'll come out a little darker, but when you have a whole, when you've got a whole model, and let's say your model has, let's say it's a schooner model, and you've got a large foresail and a large mainsail and 2 head sails. So now you've got 4 sails out, and they're all unfurled. You're showing them unfurled. That color will almost be seen as white because there's no white to reference it. The only way you'd have white to reference it close enough to actually say, oh geez, those sails are kind of gray, is if you had something like, if the mast was painted white or the bowsprit was painted white or something like that. So even though you're mixing this gray color and you know it's gray, it will largely be perceived as white. Not totally, and that's exactly what you want. You want something that's largely perceived as white. You don't want the colors to be the real focus here. You're trying to achieve a realistic look. And in real life, you would be viewing this schooner, let's say it was a 75-foot schooner, you'd be viewing that 75-foot schooner from probably, to see the whole thing, end to end, you'd be viewing it from 150 feet away. And those sails would be white. And it's only when you get closer that you start to pick up the color. And the same thing will happen with your model. If somebody's looking at your model from 150 scale feet away, let's say 1/4 of an inch to the foot, that would be like, well, I don't know what it'd be because I don't have a calculator in front of me, but it would be quite a distance. Let's just say, for argument's sake, 12 feet. Somebody's looking at your model from 12 feet and they see the sails on it. The sails will appear white. As soon as they start getting closer and closer and closer, then they start seeing more and more details. And they'll see that those sails are not white. They're just off-white. And that's what's going to make a realistic appearance. It's not having them be whatever color you're mixing it, gray or kind of that light raw sienna. It's having them appear as they would appear in real life. Trying to get that as close as possible. Sometimes you'll hit it right on the nose, sometimes you'll be close, and sometimes you'll be half a mile off the mark. Just got to keep trying until you get it right, till you get what you like and what works for your particular model. But this is how you do it. Let me back up. This is how I do it. You might look at it and say, yeah, I like the way he does that, but I don't like the way he does that. And you might do it differently. Go right ahead. Please, this is just a jumping off point, and if you discover something, let me know. I'd love to get information from you guys too. So, that's another one. Okay, so we're back, and these things are fairly dry, and here we have the gray, and here we have the off-white, the antique white, or ecru, or whatever you want to call it. Both of these would be okay. This is a little too intense. The gray is a little too dark, I think. And it's also, it dried, oddly enough, it dried a little blue. Even though I had mixed it in with a little bit of this nice warm color, it still dried too blue for my taste. I don't know if these colors are showing up on the camera. I don't know if there's enough contrast to show them up. Maybe if I put them down there. Or if I take a white piece of paper and now you might be able to see it better, I don't know. But that's basically the process. There's really not a lot to it. You just experiment with it. Don't be afraid to mess up. If you don't like the color that this is, you can always paint over it. At least one more time. Maybe even 2 times if you're careful. Before you start adding too much bulk. So it's not even like you're even wasting material. I can, if I don't like this color, I could just paint over it. Doesn't matter. So, don't be afraid, be bold, experiment. Marissa, I hope this helps. If not, and you have something specific that I didn't cover in this that you really want to know about, just hop hop over to the website, tjloria.com. You don't even need the 3 W's in front of it, just tjloria.com, and go to the contact page. Send me an email and I'll write back. So I hope that helps. So let's move on to the next thing. Okay, so the next question comes from Paramutori. That's all one name, and I'm probably saying it really badly. And he asks, or actually he tells me that he would love a video on weathering a wooden ship hull. I just happen to have a ship hull right there, so we'll clear away this mess and we'll get started on that next. If you had this model here and you wanted to take some of the brightness, some of the newness off it, one way that you might do it is you might consider doing a light coat of a wash coat, a gray wash coat, a light gray wash coat, just to take some of the newness off it. The way you could do that is with some black and white paint that you thin down and really water it down so that it's barely a stain. And the best way to apply it would probably be with an airbrush, and that's what we'll use today. I think what I'll do is, I don't want to do the whole thing because there's a couple of different methods I want to try and I want to see what works best. So let's mask some of this off here just roughly. Okay, so now, I've got this double action brush here, and when I'm not busy spilling paint all over, now let's see what it looks like if we peel some of this away. Okay, so we've sprayed just a little bit of a wash coat on the first 3 ports, and you can see as I pan over, by the time I get to the 4th one, you can see where I stopped, right there. And you can see just that little bit made a difference. It took some of the newness off it, some of the shine off it. So that's one technique. So let's try something else. So here I've got the mask stepped in just to give you a reference point. This hull would have probably just continued to darken as it got older. There might be some salt stains on it somewhere or something like that. So on this ship there would have been a channel right here, and it would have gone from about here up to, oh, I guess maybe here. Something like that. And there would have been about, I think, 4 shrouds. So four sets of dead eyes and chain plates and backing plates. Those backing plates probably would have been put on with iron fastenings, probably. So there would have been some rust there. There would have been some corrosion. Again, being a British naval vessel, it would have been to a minimum, but it still may have been there. So you would have added some rust and maybe some leaching cast iron because that's what they were using on this. They were wrought iron, actually, not cast, rather. Wrought iron. There would have been some leaching and some blooming of the iron, so that might have been there too. So you might have black, you might have dirty rust. There might be powder burns on the outside from the cannon. So again, mixing just a little bit of a very weak and I'm just using whatever might give me a rust color here. I'm not even bothering to look at what colors they are. It's just some sort of light brown and a dark red. And I'm just going to go in here like that, and so in the area where the channels and the chain plates would have been, which would be somewhere around here, you would just come down and now if you do it too heavily, of course you're not even seeing this on camera, so I'm going to have to give you a real close-up after the technique is already applied. And maybe there would have been some, Godfrey Daniels, maybe there would have been some powder burns around those openings. Or maybe they just would have been darkened a little bit. Now what I'm doing is I'm putting this wash on. It's very thin. And then brushing it out. So now, let's get the camera in here nice and close, and you can see. Okay, so there you see the amount of weathering that it would take. Now we've used two different techniques. The wash technique, you can actually wash the whole hull. I chose to, on this aft section over here, I chose to use the airbrush. And there you can see the difference where I stopped. You can do that with a brush, but you run the risk of putting it on too deep, too strong, and maybe too hot in certain spots. What you really need to do, and the other thing is you need to use so much water that it's really not great to put that much water on your model. The other thing that's going to happen, and let's see if I can make it happen with this. Now you see where I've done it. Or maybe you don't. Let me move the camera over. Now everywhere where I've done it, it's going to accentuate all the hull planking. It's going to accentuate every line. And that may not be something you want. It might be, and if it is, by all means, then that's the way you can age your hull a little bit. Right now you're looking at it wet. Get a hairdryer. so let's look at those two things side by side. Alright, so on the left we have the airbrushed gray wash, and then on the right, from this point forward, we've got the brush applied wash, which was not gray, it was black. And they both look good. Just two different looks. So you've got to decide which one you'd like better for your model. But that's about as much weathering as you might want to do on the outside of the hull. So we're still on the subject of weathering planking, only this time it's deck planking. And we have a question from Rick Smith. Nice demo on weathering. I appreciate your techniques. Would love to see your ideas on weathering and wear on decks of 18th and 19th century ships. So, Rick, if it were a ship like this, a Royal Navy ship, those decks would have been wholly stoned to within an inch of their lives. So there wouldn't have been a whole lot of wear that you would actually see before it was cleaned off, and if it were cleaned off to the point where it was just worn down so much, they would just replace the decking. And most of the time it would look like you see here. If it were a merchant ship, like this mid-19th century whaler, things would be a bit different. The decks would have most likely been left to weather naturally, but the main deck of the whaler also carried a 1x12 pine sheathing over the actual deck to protect it from the extremely abusive nature of the trade. So, depending on the point in the vessel's career your model is depicting, you'd weather it accordingly. Now, this model shows the vessel right after a recent refit. The Briggs paint job is fairly fresh, the decks are pretty neat, but all the gear and the elements of the trade, the try-works, the cooper's bench, the tools, the tubs, are all showing signs of their experience. The deck of this fishing schooner has certainly seen better days. Near the portside pin rail, you can see heavy wear at the spot where the men would have stood to work the dory tackle. Those tackle would have been used at least 16 times a day to launch and retrieve the boats. And that's for each side of the schooner. So those spots would have been subjected to tremendous abuse. To a slightly lesser degree, the mechanized winch between the foremast and the windlass would have made its contribution to the condition of the deck. Dripping oil from the bearings, soot from the nearby exhaust stack, and rust would have all collected on the deck. And so it goes. In a couple of my videos now, I've demonstrated weathering techniques, and they really don't vary much. Dusting with an airbrush, washes, and dry brushing. The real challenge is in using those methods in a convincing way on your model. Weathering and creating atmosphere has less to do with good dry brushing technique and much more to do with observation of the world around us. Observe and apply what you've seen, and you'll develop your own unique natural style to express what you want your model to convey. Well, that's it for this first installment. I hope I've answered your questions adequately. If I haven't, you can always reach me through the website tjloria.com, and you can go to the contact page. In the next part, we'll look at rigging line types and how to deal with them. And we'll take a look at detailing sails, when to skimp on details, and when to put the pedal to the floor. So, until I see you again, or more accurately, until you see me again, thanks for watching. Now, get back in the shop.